I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no file for you. It's like you were never in the system. I remember staring at him, this man in a gray button-down, squinting at his screen like maybe if he looked hard enough, I'd appear. But I didn't appear. 14 months of waiting, 14 months of renewal forms and verification calls and showing up on time with every document they asked for, and according to that screen, none of it had ever happened. Lily was on my lap. 6 years old, patent leather shoes she'd insisted on wearing because she wanted to look professional. She had no idea what was happening. She was just kicking her little feet and humming to herself, completely unbothered, the way only a child can be when the world is quietly collapsing around them. I kept my voice steady. That's not possible. I have my application number right here. He typed it in. The number pulled up, but the file attached to it was hollow. Empty fields. No documentation. No history. Just a shell with my reference number stamped on it, like a label on a box someone had already emptied out. He leaned back slightly and said the words that made my stomach drop. This looks like it was removed. Internally. Not a glitch. Not a server error. Someone had gone into that system and taken me out of it. Someone with access. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Before we continue with this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I want you to understand what that waitlist meant to me. I wasn't applying for housing because I wanted a handout. I was applying because 60 days from that morning, my sublet was being sold, and I had nowhere to take my daughter. I'd been working 2 jobs, a morning shift at a medical billing office and weekend hours at a grocery store, budgeting down to the last dollar, holding everything together with both hands. That waitlist was the bridge between where we were and somewhere stable. Somewhere safe. Somewhere Lily could grow up without me wondering every 3 months if we have to move again. And someone had burned it. The manager started to say something about filing a discrepancy report. I barely heard him, because Lily had stopped humming. She tugged my sleeve and looked up at me with those big, serious eyes and said quietly, "Mommy, are we getting the home today?" I smiled at her. I told her we were working on it. And then the office door opened behind us. I turned, and every thought I had stopped mid-sentence. My parents walked in, Gerald and Diane, my father in his coat, my mother with her handbag tucked neatly under her arm. They looked put together, unbothered, exactly the way they always did in public. Like nothing in the world could touch them. Their eyes found me immediately. And here's what I'll never forget. They didn't look surprised. Not even a little. My father didn't rush over. He didn't falter. He looked at me the way he always had when he felt I'd done something beneath the family, with this slow, measured disappointment, like I was a problem he'd already solved and was annoyed to find still sitting on his desk. He straightened his jacket. And then he said it. "Why are you still applying? We already took care of it." Took care of it. I need you to sit with those words for a second. Not, "We were worried about you." Not, "We heard you were struggling." We already took care of it, like my housing application was an inconvenience they'd handled on my behalf. Like I was something to be managed, not a person making decisions for herself and her child. Lily had gone very still on my lap. Let me give you the background because you need to understand exactly how we got here. 3 years ago, I left my parents' home for the last time. Not because I wanted to blow up my family. Not because I was being dramatic. I left because when Lily was born, my parents made it clear, quietly, deliberately, in that particular way wealthy families make things clear without ever raising their voices, that my daughter was not welcome in their world. Her father and I weren't married. He wasn't someone they'd approved of. And in Gerald and Diane's framework, that made Lily a consequence, not a grandchild. They never said it in one clean sentence. They didn't have to. It was in the way Diane referred to her as the baby, and never by her name. It was in the family dinner I wasn't invited to 3 months after she was born. It was in my father's offer, practical, emotionless, to set me up in my own apartment, pay my bills, support my career, as long as I made responsible arrangements for Lily's care. Meaning someone else's care. Meaning not mine. I picked my daughter. I walked out. And for 3 years, I built something real from almost nothing, just the 2 of us. They told the extended family I'd chosen my path, as if love was a detour. So no, they didn't know I'd applied for city housing. I was too proud to let them see how hard things had gotten, which meant only one thing. They'd found out another way. Someone told them, or they'd been watching. Diane stepped closer. Her voice dropped to that tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable in public. She said they'd done me a favor, that this kind of housing government assistance, a shared complex, would follow me, would affect how people saw me professionally, would affect Lily's schooling options. She said it like she was protecting us. Gerald said if I came home, just me, get settled, then figure out the rest, they would handle everything. A proper apartment, stability, a future. The rest. He meant Lily. I looked at the manager. He was staring at his keyboard. And that's when I noticed it, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. Not embarrassment. Something else. Recognition. Like he knew who Gerald was before my father had said a single word. Do you know my father? I asked him directly. The room went quiet. He pushed back his chair and said he needed to step out to make a call. He left. And then Diane reached into her handbag, withdrew a folded piece of paper, and placed it on the desk in front of me. Flat. Deliberate. Like she'd been waiting to do it this whole time. It was a voluntary withdrawal form. My name was signed at the bottom. I had never seen that document before in my life. My hand didn't shake when I picked it up. I want to be clear about that. Because everything in me wanted to fall apart right there, wanted to slam that paper down and scream until the walls shook. But Lily was watching me. She always watches me. So I picked it up slowly, looked at it carefully, and then I took out my phone and photographed every inch of it before anyone could react. Diane reached for it. I pulled it back. That's evidence. The word landed hard. Diane's hand froze midair. Gerald's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. For the first time since they'd walked through that door, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not guilt. Calculation. He was recalibrating. Good. Let him. I stood up, Lily on my hip, and I faced them both fully. No more hushed tones. No more pretending this was a private family conversation. We were in a government office, in front of a desk, with a forged document sitting between us, and I was done performing composure for their comfort. I told them exactly what that paper was. A forged government withdrawal form. My signature, copied, I realized, from my original application where I'd signed the consent page. Someone had lifted it, traced it, replicated it cleanly enough to pass an internal review. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Diane's face crumpled. And here's what I want you to understand about Diane. Her tears are not the same as remorse. Her tears are a tool. Right on cue, she turned slightly toward the room, just enough to be visible, and said in a trembling voice that she didn't understand why I was doing this, that they'd only ever wanted what was best for me, that I'd kept Lily from them for years, and it had broken her heart. I almost laughed. I called Priya instead. Priya is my legal aid caseworker, 32 years old, sharp as a blade, and one of maybe 3 people in my life who has never once made me feel like a burden. I'd been working with her for months, navigating the housing waitlist. I put her on speaker without warning because I needed a witness and I needed her brain in the room immediately. I described the form, read her the reference number, told her my signature was on a document I had never signed. She didn't hesitate. Do not leave that building. Ask for the office supervisor. Right now. Gerald stepped closer. His voice dropped to just above a whisper, that controlled, boardroom quiet register he used when he wanted to remind you of the power he believed he held. He said, "Don't make this into something it isn't. You'll lose." Not a warning. A threat. Dressed up in a calm voice and good posture, but a threat all the same. The man had forged my signature on a government form, and he was standing in front of me telling me I would lose. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I turned to the front desk and asked loudly, clearly, for the office supervisor. Diane was still crying. A woman in the waiting area had looked up from her phone. Good. Let there be witnesses. The supervisor arrived within minutes, a composed woman in her 50s named Ms. Okafor, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and an expression that said she had seen every variety of housing office drama and was not easily rattled. She reviewed the withdrawal form. She reviewed my application log. And then she looked at something on her screen that made her go very, very still. She looked up at Gerald. Then toward the back office where the manager had disappeared. She said it quietly, almost to herself. This signature was processed through an internal staff login. Someone on the inside had helped them. And now, there was a paper trail. Ms. Okafor didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She simply turned to Gerald and Diane and said that she needed them to wait in the separate consultation room while she reviewed a few things internally. Gerald straightened. That won't be necessary. This is a family matter. Ms. Okafor looked at him over her glasses.
Sir.
A government withdrawal form was processed through a staff login that doesn't match the applicant's visit history. That makes this an administrative matter. I need you to wait in the other room. Gerald opened his mouth. She said one word. Investigation. He closed it. Diane stopped crying. It was remarkable, actually like a switch had been flipped. One moment she was dabbing her eyes, and the next she was perfectly still, watching Gerald the way people watch someone else drive when they're not sure the brakes work. For the first time, I think she understood that this had gone further than she'd known. That whatever Gerald had arranged, it had left fingerprints. They went into the consultation room. The door clicked shut behind them. Priya arrived 22 minutes later. I know because I watched the clock on the wall the entire time, sitting with Lily in the waiting area, letting her draw on the back of a deposit form the receptionist had quietly offered her. Priya walked in with her bag over one shoulder and her game face fully on, and the first thing she did was squeeze my hand once. Firm, quick, and then get to work. Ms. Okafor pulled the access logs. And what they showed was this. My file had been deleted 3 weeks earlier. The deletion was executed using the manager's login credentials. But the IP address attached to that session didn't match any device registered to city offices. Someone had accessed the system remotely from outside the building, using credentials that belonged to an employee on the inside. Priya flagged it before Ms. Okafor finished the sentence. Then came the detail that reframed everything. Gerald's property development company held an active vendor contract with the City Housing Authority, a facilities management arrangement that gave certain staff members in his organization indirect access to city systems through a shared third-party portal. It was the kind of access that was never supposed to touch applicant records. It was the kind of access that, if used correctly, left almost no trace. Almost. Priya looked at me. He had a pathway in. He just needed someone on the inside to leave the door unlocked. That someone broke within the hour. The manager, whose name, I learned, was Mr. Holt, asked to speak to Ms. Okafor privately. She brought Priya. I found out what was said afterward, piece by piece. 6 weeks earlier, Gerald had approached Mr. Holt at a charity fundraiser. They had mutual connections, the kind of city-adjacent social world where everyone knows everyone and favors flow like water. Gerald had made a donation to a community development fund that Mr. Holt publicly supported. $5,800. In exchange, Mr. Holt had shared his login credentials with a third party Gerald provided. He said he didn't know exactly what they'd be used for. He said he thought it was a records query. He said he didn't think it would go this far. He was fully cooperating now. I was standing in the hallway when Diane came out of the consultation room alone. She walked toward me slowly, no performance this time, no audience to play to. Just her and me, and the sound of Lily's crayon on paper around the corner. She said, "We just wanted you home." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about 14 months on a wait list. I thought about the forged signature. I thought about Gerald's voice telling me I would lose. "You wanted me without her," I said. "That's not home." I took Lily's hand and walked back into Ms. Okafor's office. That evening, Priya submitted my case to the City Housing Board's Emergency Review Panel, a process reserved for applicants whose files had been compromised through fraud or administrative misconduct. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. 3 days later, I walked into that meeting room. My parents were already seated on the far side, summoned as respondents in the fraud inquiry, their attorney beside them. When Gerald saw me walk in with Priya, a folder of documentation, and the kind of stillness that only comes when you know exactly what you're holding, he went pale. The board chair's name was Mr. Adeyemi. 60-something, silver-haired, with the energy of a man who had sat through 1,000 of these hearings and had long since lost his patience for people who wasted public resources for personal gain. He read from the inquiry report without theatrics. Just facts, clean and sequential, laid out in the kind of language that leaves no room for reinterpretation. Gerald had leveraged his company's vendor access to the city housing portal. He had paid Mr. Holt $5,800 through a charitable donation routed to obscure the transaction. He had provided a third-party operative with Mr. Holt's login credentials to remotely delete my file. And he had arranged for my signature, lifted from my original application, to be forged onto a voluntary withdrawal form, which was then processed internally to make my removal look self-initiated. Every step deliberate. Every step designed to leave me with nothing, so that I would come back to him with nothing, and he could hand me a lifeline with conditions already attached. The condition, as always, was Lily. Every question this story opened with: why was my file gone? Who had access? How did they know I'd be there? Why did the manager look away? Every single one of them had an answer now. There was no ambiguity left. No loose thread. Just a man who had confused control with love for so long that he'd built an entire architecture of harm around it and called it parenting. Mr. Adeyemi set the report down. He looked across the table and said, "The original applicant's file will be fully reinstated with priority status, effective immediately." I exhaled. I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding that breath. 14 months on a wait list. 3 years of rebuilding. 60 days from losing our housing. And in one sentence, from a man I'd never met before that morning, it was over. Not fixed, nothing about what my parents had done was fixable, but over. We were through it. Lily was beside me, drawing again. She had her tongue between her teeth the way she did when she was concentrating. She looked up when the room shifted, sensing the change in energy the way children always do, and she whispered, "Does this mean we get the home?" I pulled her close. "Yeah, baby. We do." She went straight back to her drawing, completely unbothered. Exactly the way she'd been at the start of all of this, kicking her patent leather shoes, humming to herself, trusting me completely. I had to look at the ceiling for a moment, so I didn't cry in front of the board. Now, here is what happened after. Because I need you to know it didn't end in that room. Mr. Holt was placed on immediate administrative leave. Within 3 weeks, he was terminated. The city launched a formal audit of all vendor portal access tied to Gerald's company, and the facilities contract, worth just under $2 million annually, was suspended pending review. Gerald's attorney tried to frame the whole thing as a misunderstanding, a well-intentioned act by a concerned father who hadn't understood the legal boundaries of what he'd asked for. Mr. Adeyemi did not appear moved by this framing. Priya filed a civil complaint on my behalf for fraud, forgery of a government document, and interference with a public housing process. I made one decision that surprised even her. I did not pursue criminal charges personally. Not because what they did wasn't criminal. It was. But because I had watched my mother's face in that hearing room, and I had seen something I hadn't expected to see. Not remorse exactly, but the particular devastation of a woman who had followed her husband's lead for 30 years and was only now, in a government hearing room, beginning to understand where it had taken her. I wasn't doing it for Diane. I was doing it for me. I refused to let Gerald take up one more day of my life than he already had. The civil complaint moved forward regardless. The public record of the inquiry was exactly that, public. Within a month, it had reached the edges of their social circle. The charity board Gerald sat on asked him to step down quietly. 2 business associates distanced themselves. The family name he had sacrificed his granddaughter to protect had developed a crack he would spend years trying to paper over. I did not watch it happen. I was busy. 6 weeks after the hearing, I got the keys. 2-bedroom apartment, 2nd floor, 10 minutes from Lily's school. The walls were white, and the floors were bare, and there was afternoon light coming through the kitchen window in a way that made the whole place feel larger than it was. We had almost no furniture yet, an air mattress, 2 plates, a box of Lily's books. None of it mattered. Lily ran straight to the bigger bedroom, stood in the middle of it, and spun in slow circles with her arms out, looking at the ceiling. I stood in the doorway and watched her. I took out my phone and photographed her mid-spin. The light catching her, arms wide, completely at home in a place we'd only just arrived. I wrote one caption underneath it. Home. I didn't send it to anyone. It wasn't for anyone else. It was just ours. This moment, this light, this little girl spinning in a room that finally belonged to us. For 3 years, I had been surviving. Budgeting to the last dollar, working 2 jobs, smiling at Lily so she wouldn't see how scared I was. I had held everything together with both hands and sheer stubbornness and the absolute refusal to let anyone, not circumstance, not Gerald, not anyone, convince me that my daughter was a problem to be solved. She was never the problem. She was always the point. And we were home,